All right, here's the showdown between the Nikon ZR and the Sony FX3. We're going to be doing comparisons between the image quality, handling and ergonomics, and the overall user experience between each camera. Let's get into it. Now, I want to preface this comparison video by saying the Sony FX3 was released nearly 5 years ago. So there's been a lot of new tech and upgrades to sensor technology between that time. And to even compare something new like the Nikon ZR to the nearly 5-year-old Sony FX3 is really impressive for the Sony FX3. Also, to preface this video, I think I should talk about the pricing right off the bat, because that's really the big elephant in the room between these two cameras. The Nikon ZR is coming in at only $2,100, while the Sony FX3, like I mentioned, is almost 5 years old, is still sitting around $3,900 new. Now, obviously that's the price for the body alone. You'll definitely need some additional accessories to better suit your shooting style. So throughout this comparison video, please keep those 2 points in mind, that the Sony FX3 is nearly 5 years old and the vast price difference between them. All right, I know you guys want to see image quality comparisons, but before I dive into that, I want to talk a little bit about the lineup between these cameras. So as we know, Nikon purchased the company Red and made the Nikon ZR. It mixed the photography heritage and history of Nikon with Red's proven color science. So understanding that the Nikon ZR has, albeit a 12-bit Nikon edition version of Red Code RAW internally, puts this in the lineup of other Red cinema cameras like the Komodo, Komodo X, and the Raptor. So if you're doing an A/B talking head interview, this can easily fit with other Red cameras. The color science is exactly the same. Like I mentioned, this is a 12-bit version. The other Red cameras like the DSMC2 and DSMC3 line have 16-bit. So you just have a lot more flexibility when pushing and pulling colors in post. But as far as image quality, this definitely matches perfectly with other Red cameras. Now for the Sony FX3, this fits with the other Sony cinema line cameras, like the FX6, which is a bigger body, bigger brother to the FX3. They share the same exact sensor. So if you're doing an A/B talking head with the FX3 and FX6, they'll match perfectly. Now you also have the FX2, which was a recently released slightly upgrade on certain things of the FX3, has a cool EVF. Now the Sony FX2 shares the same sensor as the Sony a7 IV, which is a 33 megapixel sensor and has much faster autofocusing features as opposed to a only 12 megapixel sensor in the Sony FX3 and FX6 lineup. So if you're looking for bigger bodied cameras with additional rigging options for larger crews, then you'll really have no issue between either of these lineups. All right, now let's dive into the image quality comparisons between these two cameras. Now, like I mentioned earlier, the Sony FX3 has a 12.1 megapixel full frame sensor, as opposed to the Nikon ZR, which has a 24.5 megapixel partially stacked full frame sensor. Now, also another thing to note is that the Nikon ZR can shoot in 6K, as opposed to the Sony FX3 can only shoot in 4K. So let's see if you can really tell the difference between 24.5 megapixels versus 12.1, 6K versus 4K. Let's run the test. So this first image quality test is going to be comparing the overall clarity between both of these cameras. We're going to be shooting at their highest resolution, best codec that you can shoot internally from either one of these cameras. Now remember, the highest resolution the Sony FX3 can shoot in is 4K, H.265, 10-bit 422. Now the Nikon ZR can shoot in 6K Red RAW 12-bit internally. All right, I want you guys to be honest. Tell me in the comments if you got this right. Now let's drop the resolution. Let's keep the Sony FX3 at 4K, H.265, 10-bit 422. We're gonna go to 4K Red Raw 12-bit for the Nikon ZR. Let's see if you get this one right. So overall clarity between the Nikon ZR and the Sony FX3, I think it's no surprise to anyone that the Nikon ZR, being able to shoot in Red Raw internally 6K, has much more detail, sharpness, and clarity in the image. Now, at the end of the day, when we're delivering to our phones and we're all watching in a compressed version on Instagram, does it really matter? Probably not. And honestly, over the last 5 years, the Sony FX3 has been the top dog as far as mirrorless cinema cameras. So none of us, myself included, has ever really had any issues with image quality on the Sony FX3. But just for funsies, to compare both images, yes, the Nikon ZR does have more sharpness, more clarity, and more definition and detail in the image. Now, when we drop it down to the 4K version of the Red Raw internally on the Nikon ZR, we can see the image detail come down a little bit on the Nikon ZR and comes a little bit closer to the Sony FX3's image clarity and detail, but still the Nikon ZR has a little bit more richness and definition in the image. All right, now this is a fun test, and I know everyone's gonna jump in the comments if we don't do this test, but we're gonna put the Nikon ZR in the H.265 format, just like the Sony FX3 is, so we can have a fun and fair comparison. But obviously, if you're getting the Nikon ZR, you're not shooting in H.265. You're shooting in the Red Raw. That's why you're getting this one. You're shooting in Red Raw, not H.265. But let's do the comparison just for you guys, and so we don't get killed in the comments. Why didn't you do the H.265 comparison? That's not fair. The Sony FX3 only shoots in the H.265. Well, you know, you get this camera for the Red Raw. Just saying. All right, now here's the side-by-side comparison. All right, so now we can claim a winner for that comparison. The Nikon ZR's H.265 is no good, no bueno. It's just overly sharp. It looks like an iPhone, as opposed to the Sony FX3's highlight roll-off and detail is much more natural and pleasing to the eye. Hey, they've made movies with this thing, and so it's been proven in the field to have a great image. But at the end of the day, with their highest codecs and resolutions internally, the Nikon ZR has much more clarity, definition, sharpness, and a better overall image coming straight out of camera internally. Now, image quality isn't just about clarity, although that's a very important factor to having a good image. Another factor to having a good image is dynamic range. How well does your camera handle highlights and shadows? Well, both of these cameras claim to have over 15 plus stops of dynamic range. Now, being a Red user and having a Red Scarlett 5K that shoots in 16 stops of dynamic range, I really do see the difference of having a camera that has incredible dynamic range. We love to take these out into the field and really test it out and see if the claim of 15 plus stops at dynamic range holds up out there in normal day-to-day conditions. So for example, you're shooting B-roll in a room that has a lot of windows and you didn't bring external lights to compensate for the light coming through those windows. A lot of cameras with lower dynamic range would crumble in those scenarios. You'd have to choose between blowing out your highlights and having more information in the shadows, or shooting something like a silhouette where you're really having to pull down those shadows to compensate for those windows. Now, obviously there's technique and strategy when it comes to shooting against windows. You really don't want to shoot into the sun and have the sun in the frame. Most cameras that have great dynamic range like these two will surely struggle in those environments, unless you have some artificial lighting inside to compensate for those windows. So a side-by-side dynamic range test between these two cameras. Overall, you'll be hard-pressed to find any issues between these two cameras in regards to dynamic range. Now, what about the color bit depth? That has a role in the final grading process of these two cameras. We'll get into a more detailed comparison of color grading in another video. Let's talk about 12-bit versus 10-bit and what that really means. Being able to shoot in 12-bit offers you over 68 billion colors, as opposed to being able to shoot in 10-bit, which offers over 1 billion colors. Now, if we think about that, that's a lot of colors. 1 billion, come on, 10-bit, Most people shooting in this color grading has never had any issues. When I'm color grading FX3 footage, I've never really been upset at the amount of colors and flexibility and pushing and pulling the image in DaVinci. But the option to have 68 billion colors, which is a lot more, and just gives you that much more flexibility in post when you are color grading and pushing and pulling colors between these two. All right, I know you guys are itching for me to talk about the data rates. Now, when you're shooting in the Nikon ZR, the file sizes are pretty massive. If you're shooting in 6K, 60 frames a second, red raw, the file sizes are really big. When you're shooting in the H.265, 10-bit 422 codec, file sizes are really small. So you have to understand the differences between those and make your choice when you are taking on a project. So keep that in mind. At the current firmware, the H.265 codec in the Nikon ZR, to me, in my opinion, is just not usable. I would not use it for professional use, as opposed to the Sony FX3's H.265 is superb, excellent. So that's a big factor when considering either of these two options. If you're shooting long form content and are worried about storage, then the Sony FX3 is your camera. If you're shooting short takes or you just don't care about storage and you want the best possible image, then the Nikon ZR is your camera. So that is something to consider if you are wanting to pick up the Nikon ZR, is that you're going to have to invest in some beefy storage options. I actually have a 4 terabyte CF Express Type B card inside this camera, which gives me 5 hours of 6K 24 frames internally. So it's quite a bit of storage. It's probably overkill, but works for me and gives me more peace of mind knowing that I'm not gonna fill up my cards and then I have to drop and then put everything on hold so that I can wait for this to drop. And also on the other side, you want to make sure you have fast hard drives so that you can rip your footage fast at the end of each shoot. So just remember that not every tool is for every job, and please take that into consideration before selling the whole lot, selling all your Sony lenses to go pick up a Nikon ZR if you're concerned about storage issues. What about the low light ability between these two cameras? Now we know the king of low light is the Sony FX3, but can the Nikon ZR keep up? Yeah, I think it does. It has a native ISO of 800 and a higher base ISO of 6400. The Sony FX3 has a base ISO of 800 and a high base ISO of 12,800. And I've used that plenty of times in multiple scenarios where I am going into from a bright environment to a really dark environment. So that's a really nice feature to have and really speeds up your workflow if you're trying to pump out content quick and you just want a clean image and you don't have to denoise. Currently with today's technology, the denoiser in DaVinci is really good, but just bogs down your machine too much to where it's not really practical when you are trying to churn out and pump out content quickly for social or YouTube or for a client. So having a clean image at 12,800 ISO really opens up the options for you to shoot literally in the dark. But in most occasions, do you really need that much ISO? That's up for you to decide. For me, when I'm shooting with the Sony FX3, I feel like the jump from 800 to 12,800 is really drastic. And most times I have an ND filter on, even if I'm inside, so that I can make that jump and I'm not using any in-between ISOs because I know that'll introduce more noise because it's not the native and base ISOs of the camera. So I'll do my jump from 800 to 12,800 and have an ND to compensate for the huge increase in ISO. If I really realistically needed it to go to like 3200 ISO, I can use that ND to compensate. So having something in between like the 6400 ISO from the Nikon ZR is actually really good. And I haven't had a scenario where I needed more ISO, and I really feel like the 6400 ISO has been more than enough for most scenarios. So the low light crown still goes to the Sony FX3 for that crazy 12,800 ISO, but don't discount the low light ability of the Nikon ZR and that it can shoot in 800 and also 6400 as its native ISOs. All right, I can't forget about the autofocus. The autofocus from either one of these cameras are really good. I would give the slight edge to the Nikon ZR for having slightly faster tracking autofocus. Now, again, given that the FX3 is 5 years old, the autofocus is still fantastic and can get the job done. It's good enough for government work. But again, like I said, I would give the slight edge to the ZR for the more upgraded and faster autofocusing tracking features. Okay, what about the Sony FX3's stabilization versus the Nikon ZR's vibration reduction. The Sony FX3 stabilization has a slight edge over the stabilization in the Nikon ZR in my opinion. I get a little bit more micro jitters from the Nikon ZR. Now obviously if you add more to the rig, top handle, a cage, a bigger lens, you might be able to reduce some of those micro jitters, but I do receive quite a bit of micro jitters when I'm shooting 24 frames, especially with something like a 50 mil, 40 mil, definitely 85. So if you're shooting anything past 50 mil, make sure you throw that in 60 frames so you can kind of tighten up some of those micro jitters. But I do give the slight edge to the Sony FX3's stabilization. Although for most handheld occasions, both are really good. Okay, what about the sensor readout speeds between these two cameras? The Sony FX3 has a readout speed of 12.4 milliseconds as opposed to the Nikon ZR's readout speed of 4 milliseconds. Now that's a big difference in reducing any rolling shutter artifacts when you're shooting handheld. The Nikon ZR has a much faster readout speed, which gives you better performance when shooting handheld. Now, in a real-world test using both of these cameras rigorously, rolling shutter artifacts has never really been an issue and something I've never really thought of or seen from the FX3. So on paper, having the slower readout speed really doesn't affect the overall image, nor in my opinion adds any rolling shutter artifacts when I'm shooting handheld. And because of the pretty good sensor readout speeds from both of these cameras, they can both shoot high frame rates of up to 240 frames per second. Now that's in 1080p, which most people aren't going to use, but the option to shoot in 120 frames per second is a very popular choice to shoot in. One important thing to note is that the Sony FX3 can shoot in a 4K 120 frames uncropped version. Now the Nikon ZR can also shoot at 4K at up to 120 frames per second, but has a 1.5 times crop. I know that's a bummer. It's not that bad really. It's actually really, really good still. The clarity, the definition, the detail is still all there. You just get that slight crop when shooting in 4K 120. So the winner in slow motion goes to the Sony FX3 because it doesn't have that crop. If the Nikon ZR with its better clarity and image quality had a 4K 120 uncropped version, I would give the winner to the Nikon ZR in regards to slow motion video recording. Now, as you can tell, both of these cameras look pretty similar. And the reason why is because I have a small rig side handle on the Nikon ZR. If you really strip it down, it's very, very hard to handle and is really sleek. It's really cool when you're doing street photography, run and gun, and it really does feel like a rangefinder style camera. So I do like the option of having a sleek design and you can add a small rig handle to add a little bit more girth and bulk to that side grip. The FX3 has a built-in side grip, which is really nice. This is definitely one of the best qualities of this camera is the handling of it. It has a great grip. The ergonomics are fantastic. Also has a couple of 1/4-20 screws on top, so you have more rigging options if needed. The Nikon ZR does not have any other 1/4-20s other than the bottom tripod 1/4-20 on bottom, which is a single 1/4-20. When you add this small rig handle though, it does add a few more rigging options. This small rig handle does add more girth and better handling as opposed to not having it when you're shooting video. The button layout between these two cameras are different as well. The Sony FX3 has more buttons on the back and top of the camera, so you have more options to set custom buttons. The Nikon ZR really went with this minimalist design. It has 3 custom buttons on the top, 1, 2, and 3, a video and photo switch, and the shutter button, record button, and also this zoom rocker, which is also very similar to the Sony FX3. It also has a zoom rocker, the record button. It also has a separate shutter button, which you can customize to be whatever you want, which is really nice. It also has this top joystick for setting your focus point and the 1, 2, and 3 customizable buttons. The Nikon ZR and the Sony FX3 both share front dials, but in the Sony FX3, you have more customization in regards to that front dial as opposed to the Nikon ZR. The only thing you can change is flip-flopping whether or not it changes shutter or aperture. You can't set your ISO to either one of these dials, which is really annoying, and I wish I could, but I have on my Nikon ZR, I have the number 1 button set to my ISO, so I just hit that, and I use the front or back dial to scroll between the ISOs. Now with the Sony FX3, you can set either one of these front or back dials to your ISO. One of the best features I think in the Sony FX3 is the ISO button number 3, you can hit that and you can set that to cycle between your native ISOs. So if I'm shooting B-roll and I need to change my ISO quickly, I can just hit one button, the number 3 ISO button on the Sony FX3, and it'll cycle between 800 and 12,800. That's a really nice feature to have. The Nikon ZR comes close. Like I said, I hit that number 1 button for my ISO, then I have to scroll the wheel, boom, and then that goes to my other base ISO. So that's 2 things I gotta do as opposed to 1. On the back of the Sony FX3, you have your on and off switch, you have your mode and your menu button, and then you have your back dial, and you have another custom button, 5 and 4, and then you have your up, right, down, and left buttons that is also on a wheel that scrolls, and then a middle button that can select different options throughout the menu. And then you also have your playback button. So a lot more buttons on the back as opposed to the Nikon ZR that only has this hamburger icon, I guess is what it's called, that if you click once pulls up your big 12, and if you hold it, it pulls up your full menu. You also have a really small joystick. I often click the wrong thing because it's just so small. And so when I go up or left or right, it sometimes does the opposite. And then you have your playback button on the back. So that's it as far as button layout on the Nikon ZR and the Sony FX3. So you definitely have more customizable buttons and options with the Sony FX3 than you do on the Nikon ZR. So as far as button layout, handling, ergonomics, straight out of the box, you know, not having the small rig side handle, the Sony FX3 is definitely the winner in my books, as it has a much more customizable layout, more buttons, better handling, better ergonomics, a better grip straight out of the box. But the one thing I do love about the button layout on the Nikon ZR is this video photo switch. Now that switch is actually a really big divide between these 2 cameras. That photo and video switch really does divide these 2 cameras into separate categories. The Sony FX3 is known for its great video capabilities, but what about the photo capabilities? Does it have any? Is it any good? I would say it's not terrible. It takes photos. The Nikon ZR's photo capabilities are very impressive, as it is also a Nikon camera, so it has to have great photo capabilities, right? And it does. The video photo switch is seamless and works really fast. I mentioned I have this really cool hack when I'm doing both video and photo, where I have an ND filter on and I expose for my video, and then when I switch to photo, I have it on aperture or shutter priority, so it automatically gets my exposure down, and I can literally switch back and forth and capture both video and photo, which is really nice to have in one machine. So if you need to and you're in a pinch and you need to take a photo, FX3 can still do that. But can you rely on it for a photography gig? Probably not. Can you rely on the Nikon ZR for a photography gig? Absolutely. We've done plenty of photography gigs or hybrid gigs that require both video and photo, and this camera continues to shine and deliver for those clients. All right, also in regards to layout, we got to talk about the screen. The Nikon ZR has a beautiful 4-inch LCD screen. I mean, it is fantastic. It's really, really nice, and it's really bright as well. When I'm shooting outdoor, bright sunlight, haven't had any issues where I couldn't see my image or get critical focus. The Sony FX3, oh, sorry, buddy. But when you compare it side by side, or when you shoot with the Nikon ZR or handle it for a little bit, and then you go back to the Sony FX3, oh man, is it depressing? It's sad. You put it side by side. I mean, just look at the little guy here. Look at this. Look at the size of that screen compared to that. Now, this trickles into another topic, the ports. The Nikon ZR does not have a full-size HDMI, as opposed to the Sony FX3 that does have a full-size HDMI. So attaching an external monitor to the Sony FX3 has been a common rigging setup for most creators. Now, when we're looking at the Nikon ZR, and because it has that micro HDMI cable, but also has this beautiful 4-inch LCD screen, do you really need to attach a monitor? In my use case of using this camera for multiple projects, outdoor, indoor, run and gun B-roll, interviews, the monitor quality, size, and brightness has been more than enough to where I've never had any second thoughts about adding another monitor. So for me in my use case, I love using a camera that doesn't have any cables and all these this additional V mount to power your monitor, or you have MPF batteries hanging out the backside of your monitor. There's just extra weight to the rig. Like I've mentioned before, I shoot with the Red Scarlet, the DSMC2 lineup, and those cameras don't have any cables. You have a monitor, you have a side handle that pulls focus and also hits record. You have a V mount, all not needing any cables. It's a wonderful technology that Red came out with many years ago in the DSMC2 lineup and followed suit in the DSMC3 lineup. I've had plenty of rigs back in the day. I used to shoot with a Z cam. I had a lot of Fujifilm cameras that I would rig up. And I'll tell you right now, I do not miss rigging up monitors, extra V mounts, and having all these cables to wind up. I definitely don't miss those days. So the option to just pull out your camera, put a lens on, turn it on, and shoot photo and video with this beautiful 4-inch screen, as opposed to having to rig up another monitor or screen so that you can see your image and get critical focus and see outdoors. That's a win for me for the Nikon ZR as far as the monitor goes. It's so small, it's so underwhelming. Put the little guy away. Now let's keep moving around the body. Pause. Let's talk about the memory card slots. The Sony FX3 has a memory card slot on the side of the camera, as opposed to the Nikon ZR, which has a memory card slot on the battery door. I know that's a big negative for a lot of folks, especially if you do a lot of tripod work, a lot of interviews, and you're needing to swap out batteries. It's gonna be hard to open this battery door because you're gonna have to, your battery's here and you also have your memory card here, which is really weird. I know, I wish they would have put it on the side, but considering it's a very sleek and thin design, I can see how that would be tough to add that to the side without adding a little bit more bulk to the camera. So I get it. So as far as real world testing, I haven't had any issues with the memory card, battery all being in the same spot, but it is nice to have it on the side in case you need to access your card quickly during a shoot. You need to quickly swap memory cards. You don't have to get into the battery door and take the camera off the tripod. So a win there for the Sony FX3. Also, the Sony FX3 has dual memory card slots, as opposed to the Nikon ZR that only has one. Now I'm gonna throw it in there that the Nikon ZR also has another slot for a micro SD card. I believe they threw that in there so that you can load LUTs onto that micro SD card, but other than that, you're not doing any real photography or video shooting on that thing. The Sony FX3's dual card slots hold a CF Express Type A and a SD card in both of the slots. The Nikon ZR has a single slot for a CF Express Type B cards, which are newer and faster cards. So as far as which one is better, considering that this has a dual card slot, this one has a single card slot. I mean, like I said, I got a 4 terabyte card in here, so I don't really care for the dual slot. I got plenty and more than enough storage. I've literally been shooting on this camera for the last month and a half, 2 months. I haven't formatted yet. I keep forgetting. I have all my stuff on here that I've ever shot with on this camera, which is a lot already within the last month and a half. So I have no issues with storage and requiring or needing a dual card slot. It's no issues for me, but if that's a big deal for you and you need dual card slots, you got it on the Sony FX3. Now, as far as the battery doors, I like the Sony FX3's kind of lock switch here, where when you release it, it's not dangling, you know, it's got a little movement, but watch this. Here's the Nikon ZR. It feels a little finicky back there. I don't think I'll break it, but you know, it kind of just flops around. Now, a big feature to note for the Nikon ZR is that it has an extremely adaptable lens mount. The short flange distance of the Z mount gives you the option to adapt to nearly any lens mount that you can think of. Sony E, PL, M mount, EF mount. I mean, there's loads of options that you can pick from in regards to adapting lenses to the Nikon Z mount. So that's a big win for the Z mount. You can also adapt plenty of lenses to the E mount, but I think most Sony shooters won't have an issue with adapting lenses since the Sony E mount has a plethora and a great lineup of lens choices. The Nikon ZR also has great choices in regards to native Z mount glass, just not as much as the Sony E mount. Now, when you're picking up the Sony FX3, and if you're any kind of real video shooter, professional shooter, you're definitely gonna consider picking up that XLR top handle. I got it right here, and easily slides into the hot shoe of the Sony FX3. I really love using this XLR top handle as it adds Obviously 2 XLR inputs, and adds a better handling and ergonomics with this top handle. So if you have any heavier lenses, you know, those G Masters are pretty heavy. So when you add this top handle, this gives you just better balance and handling when shooting B-roll or video. Now, as far as audio quality with this XLR top handle, it's really fantastic. Real world tests, run and gun interviews, walking up to somebody, hey, how you doing, man? Tell me how the workout's going, whatever. Tell me how you're doing. Man, the interviews are fantastic. I always just have this on auto when I'm in those environments, and they're run and gun, they're fast. Maybe I'm running and gunning by myself and I don't have a separate audio engineer, someone to dial in levels. I'll just put this on auto and it really does a great job. I've had a handful of times where the audio peaked. Well, because this is only 24-bit audio, I wasn't able to recover that. Now let's go to the Nikon ZR. The Nikon ZR has 32-bit float internal audio recording. So if you do have those instances where someone peaked, they talked too loud, or they were talking too quietly, you can recover those files and have much more flexibility in your audio recording. So that's a huge plus for the Nikon ZR in that it shoots in 32-bit float internally. The 32-bit float recording doesn't stop with the internal acoustics. It also runs through the 3.5mm mic jack, which is really special because now you can plug in any microphone through the 3.5mm headphone jack, and you will give that microphone or lav mic 32-bit recording. Crazy technology. And I love it. I'm here for it. So having the ability to shoot in 32-bit float as opposed to 24-bit just gives you that much more flexibility to recover those loud sounds, that peaking audio or very low and quiet sounds. So that's a huge plus for the Nikon ZR. So as far as design, handling, ease of use, winner goes to the FX3's top handle. As far as more flexibility in recovering audio files, the 32-bit float internal in the Nikon ZR is the winner for sure. Now, something important to all of us creators is, does the Nikon ZR overheat? We know the FX3 does not overheat. It has internal fans and cooling to keep the camera cool, but can or will the Nikon ZR overheat? Now, if you look at it, the Nikon ZR does not have any fans. It somehow has this internal cooling through the body to not allow it to overheat. I've shot interviews with this in a controlled environment for hours at a time and never had any issues with overheating. So that fits the bill for me. If you're shooting outdoor weddings in the Texas heat, take a look at Matt Johnson's video. He had a couple of the Nikon ZRs out in the sun, over 90 degrees, in direct sunlight, recording in 6K, 60 frames a second, which you normally wouldn't shoot in 60 frames a second for that long. But take a look at that and you'll see that the Nikon ZR also does not overheat. So overheating issues, no problem between these two cameras. The battery life between these two cameras, considering their small mirrorless bodies, are pretty good. I've seen a lot of people set up their FX3 with an additional V-mount, which again, I don't prefer. It adds more cables and more liability with weight and disconnecting a cable from the V-mount. I do that plenty of times when this camera is rigged up with a V-mount. But as far as the internal batteries that come with the camera, they're pretty good. You'll be able to shoot long form format of up to 45 minutes to an hour on one single battery before you have to swap it out. So in regards to battery life, considering they're small mirrorless cameras, the battery life is pretty good. So at the end of the day, which camera is for you? Now you're gonna have to make that decision for yourself, as these cameras are eerily similar in regards to size and rigging options. So we're not talking about a camera that's a big body like the FX6 compared to the Nikon ZR, or the FX3 compared to a Red Komodo, which has more rigging options. These two cameras have gone head to head over the last few months since the release of the Nikon ZR because of the similarities in the body type. So remember, keep in mind that this camera comes in at only $2,100 as opposed to the FX3 coming in at around $3,900. So that's a big price difference for a lot of creators out there that are willing to save the extra cash to invest in some lenses or different rigging options like the side handle, memory card that you're gonna need for the 6K Red RAW that this camera can shoot in. So pound for pound, if we're talking image quality, handling, user experience, these two cameras are both gonna give you exceptional results in the video department, but what really divides these two is the photo capabilities of the Nikon ZR. So if you're a hybrid shooter and you need to have a camera that can shoot both video and photo at a very high level, the Nikon ZR is 100% your choice. If you already have a Sony FX6 or other Sony cameras and you want just a video specific camera, the Sony FX3 is and has been a great option for many creators out there for the last 5 years. So which one would we pick? I can't tell you that. Man never tells. But I can tell you that we like both of these options, and we really had a great time comparing these two, as the Sony FX3 being 5 years old is still very, very impressive. And that H.265 10-bit 422 really does hold up to a 6K red raw internal. So it's really impressive what Sony has done with their color science, and the fact that it keeps the file sizes down. The Nikon ZR just hasn't figured that part out yet with keeping file sizes down, as you only have one compression ratio option when shooting in R3D NE. So just like any comparison video out there, you have your pros, you have your cons, but which one is right for you? That's up for you to decide. Let us know in the comments down below which camera you guys are going with. If you're a Sony shooter and you're loving the Nikon ZR and you're ready to jump ship, selling all your lenses, selling your house, everything, let us know in the comments which one you guys are going with. Hey, if you guys have any questions regarding this video, this comparison, if we missed something, drop it in the comments down below. Let us know. Let us know what other videos you'd like to see in the future regarding the Nikon ZR. We're still cooking up more videos with the Nikon ZR. So make sure you guys hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our future videos. Hey, be sure to like this video, share it with the world, share it with grandma, share it with your mom. Let them know, hey, the guys at ZooLab are doing some awesome work, and we'd really appreciate that. But hey, that's it for us, guys, and hopefully you guys enjoyed this thorough comparison video between the Nikon ZR and the Sony FX3. Appreciate you guys a ton, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.